Hey guys, we're looking at Unit 10, Human Development. This should be the fourth video that you're looking at. Today we're going to look at describing how developmental psychologists research development over the lifespan and analyzing how sex roles influence individual and social behavior throughout the lifespan. We're mainly focused on adolescence today, but we're also going to be looking in the very near future about that period of called young adulthood, which is 20 to 40. And some things to keep in mind about young adulthood is physical characteristics include muscle strength and reaction times will peak. External aging will happen in your early 30s, so your skin starts to lose elasticity. You start to have graying hair. I've talked about mine in class before. Lower metabolic rates, so you have more fat relative to muscle. And the maximum functioning of all of your body systems is attained, including senses. So really, you are at your physical peak probably in your early 20s, early 30s, and then it kind of all goes downhill from there. So focusing really on adolescence, there's been a lot of research recently dedicated to adolescence. Technology has enabled a better view of adolescent growth. We used to think that the human brain didn't undergo any significant growth past the age of 5. But research has determined that many of those qualities, we have unique qualities that are just for adolescent growth. So for example, adolescents have more white matter in the brain. The neurons are becoming more myelinated, connected, conductive. We've talked about before that development of the prefrontal cortex where reasoning and decision making is not fully developed. I'm going to make a note that adolescents who have a more developed or mature brain still make poor, risky decisions more so than their less mature peers. The development of the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system are the cause. And so you can see here the blue represents the maturing of the brain areas, and so it's not really until we're into our 20s that we fully have that development of the prefrontal cortex. Overall, adolescence is a period marked by turmoil, especially socially. In recent decades, we've seen teen suicide rates rise, attempted 2% for males, about 5% versus females. Adolescents tend to exhibit more violent behavior. Violent behavior in adolescence tends to climb from puberty until about age 18, and then it tapers off and declines. And violent behavior doesn't have to be something, crazy like a Columbine High School, but it's fighting at school, it is just hostility towards people, and taking that out sometimes physically. A rule of thumb is that not all adolescents experience storm and stress, but storm and stress is just more likely during that adolescent period. Erik Erikson said that adolescents are searching for their identity. So Erikson and Piaget are going to attempt to identify human development of identity and personality. This struggle involves working out one's self-concept, embracing a system of values, and generally sticking to them throughout life. It's really this adolescent period that you guys are in right now where you're trying to figure out who am I, and you're examining your own consciousness against what your parents want and their beliefs. And so people can undergo identity changes past adolescence, and sometimes it's a lifelong process trying to figure out who you are. But really it's in adolescence where we start to question who are we and try to get the answer to that question. James Marcia identified 4 different identity status. He said there are more orientations that occur at a particular time. So let's look at those really quick. Identity diffusion is when you have like rudderless apathy. The idea that you don't have a chart or a life plan or a purpose, and you don't really know where you're going. You're just kind of out there swimming around, flailing around, not knowing, not really having a sense of direction. And that's going to cause some social and psychological problems over time. You need to at least have an idea of where you're going. And then we have identity foreclosure, where prematurely you commit to a vision or a value or a role. Sometimes maybe you grow up with your parents' expectation that they want you to be, a doctor or a lawyer, and you've never thought about, is this really what I want to do? So you shut all of the other choices down, and all you do is, and all of your choices are geared towards becoming whatever it is that you seem predisposed to do, or that your parents or whoever is in your life have already decided. And sometimes it's something that you decide, but that you don't see anything else. And so you conform to an identity that someone else has already decided for them. An identity moratorium involves an individual delaying commitment to an identity so that the individual can experiment with alternative ideologies and careers. This can be a valuable aspect to forming your identity. However, you have to be committed to making a commitment. Identity moratorium can also be associated with self-doubt and confusion. You just don't really know what you want to be, and so you kind of keep leaping to one path to the other without making a firm decision about who you are. And then you have identity achievement. It involves arriving at a sense of self-direction after some consideration of alternative perspectives. Commitments have a strength of conviction, but they can change. They're not irrevocable. Identity achievement is usually associated with a healthy self-esteem, a healthy self-image. You have security, motivation, the capacity to actually be intimate with others. Really quick, Kohlberg, and we'll kind of come back to this later on, but Lawrence Kohlberg identified 3 basic levels of moral thinking: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. So pre-conventional is before age 9. Children show morality to avoid punishment or gain reward. So you can see down there in the bottom right hand that I better share this toy or mommy will be mad. The idea that you are making a choice based on rewards and punishment. In the conventional morality, it's about laws and rules, that if you drive too fast, you're going to break the law. And so you don't drive fast because it's a law. And then in post-conventional, you really start to think about, is this law ethical? Is it moral? Do I personally agree with it? So if I don't care if it's the law, it's not right and it's not fair. Here's another way to kind of look at it a little bit more divided up. Stages 1 to 2 fall in that to pre-conventional level. Punishment, naive reward. Stage 3 and 4 is that conventional level. Am I good? Am I bad? You want to make sure that you are adhering to an authority's rule. And then 5 and 6 you have more post-conventional, where you're thinking about, is this law fair? Is it just? So in young adulthood, Kohlberg said that most adolescents are operating at the conventional level of moral development, that teens are concerned with conformity and following the rule of law. Situations and dilemmas typically are seen in black and white. There's either black and white. There's either a wrong or a right mentality to it. And then as we grow older, you start to progress more into that third level, that post-conventional level, where you begin to interpret situations and dilemmas, and you think about, is this right or is it wrong, regardless of social norms. You kind of step away from maybe that what's expected of you socially. I think it's important to remember that very few individuals ever mature into the post-conventional thinking, even adults. Most of us get very concerned with, what does society say is right or wrong, and following those guidelines. Alright, so now we're going to analyze how sex roles influence individual and social behavior throughout the lifespan. So answer the following questions, true or false, in your head. Females are more socially oriented than males. Males outperform most females on spatial tasks. Females are more irrational than males. Males are less sensitive to nonverbal cues than females. Females are more emotional than males. So if you say true to all of those, then you are right. Sex is going to refer to the biological based categories of male or female. Gender refers to the culturally constructed distinctions of masculinity and femininity. Therefore, you're born, and I think this is important to remember, you're born with your sex, that you are born either male or female. There are very small percentages of the population that's born with both. But to develop developing into a woman, developing those feminine characteristics, developing into those masculine characteristics, that's your gender, and that we choose. And so they develop throughout our lifespan, and you can be a very masculine female, or you could be a very feminine male. But again, sex is biological, gender is more of that nurture. What do we want to be? Gender stereotypes are then going to influence our gender. There are widely held beliefs about females and males in terms of their abilities, personality traits, their social behaviors. You know, those big broad things like girls can't play football, or boys are better at math, or those kind of different gender stereotypes where we plug people into. Here are some gender differences. They're either actual disparities in behavior or ability. So you might want to just take a note of some of those. Again, I think a lot of this you're going to be familiar with. I mean, you know a lot of these things. I think it's important that you may know them, you may not necessarily agree with them. Differences do exist between the sexes, and people's stereotypes are not entirely inaccurate. But the differences are actually smaller in size, fewer in number, and more complex than a stereotype would suggest. So when it comes to cognitive ability, there are three main differences. One, females tend to exhibit slightly better verbal skills than males. Males do show advantages in mathematical reasoning in high school. And starting in grade school, males tend to outperform females in visual spatial abilities, being able to tell like how far apart things are. Males are better able to estimate those than females. When it comes to social behavior, males tend to be more physically aggressive, and that shows up in childhood and accounts for a gross disproportion of violent crimes later in life. Most violent crimes are done by men. Females tend to account for more verbal aggression, snide remarks, things under the breath than males. Females tend to be stronger or sensitive to nonverbal communication. And males tend to be more sexually active than females. They tend to exhibit more risky sexual behaviors and look upon it more casually. And I think that goes back to that evolutionary perspective that we talked about at the very beginning of the year about, when it comes to sex, the idea that men are not necessarily going to have the same consequences as women. They're not going to get pregnant, whereas that is a very real concern for a lot of females. So they tend to be more risky when it comes to their sexual activities. Keep in mind that social behavior differences account for group behavior and do not indicate behaviors for individuals. I'm not speaking to you necessarily as an individual. You may be like, this is not me, or you may look at that list and say, that doesn't apply to me, and it may not. What we are looking at is when we look at females and males as a group. Rather, the ideas we hold in our minds about male and females tend to be imagined. They tend to be these archetypes, which are universally understood models of a person, a personality, or behavior. I think it goes back to that term of prototype. And kind of maybe think about in your head, who is your ultimate prototype for a man or a woman? I think that's kind of an interesting concept to think about. And then maybe think about, how do you model yourself after that? So we'll have some of these conversations in class, but hopefully this unit really applies to you, and so you can really make a connection between what I'm talking about in these slides and your own self. That's it for now, guys. I will see you in class. Bye.